Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in A Philosophy of Religion by Edgar Sheffield Brightman, published in 1940. We're going to continue on with our look at the phenomenology of revelation. We're going to look at pages 202 to 232. Let's begin by taking a look at block 1. We'll take a look at revelation as Axio-Genetic Tendency. For Brightman, the ideal has an immediate and metaphysical reference, and the movement from idea to being is called the ontological argument. For Brightman, we begin with faith in the objectivity of ideals, and we ask how these are related to nature. How is the ideal related to nature? So in note 2, we take a look at metaphysical reference and objective nature. God is the source and a continuance of values. We must define the axiogenetic aspects of these values within the real. And for Brightman, this means that we must begin with definitions of nature. They do play a role. It can't be a singularity, as it was with Aristotle. As a thing which contains the genetic principle of motion, it must address the system of nature as a whole. Brightman wants to define the holistic system of nature. Spinoza called it the totality of substance. Kant called it the totality of phenomena. Contemporary naturalists call it a system of all motions that are naturally known. But they ignore the system of values. Some naturalists, some contemporary naturalists, have said that there is within observable nature axiogenetic tendency as well. And that's what Brightman wants to pick up on, this axiogenetic tendency. So then he moves on to metaphysical reference and subjective behavior. And we look at the study of the behavior of organisms, and he wants us to negate metaphysical naturalism because it limits behavior study and states that consciousness is a physiological product only. Brightman wants that negated. Consciousness is not a physiological product of the brain for Brightman. That must be negated. And he wants to take up the concept of interpretation. That is that which negates metaphysical naturalism. Causality is not only physiological. We cannot deny conscious spirit within the universe, says Brightman. We cannot and must not deny conscious spirit. So we'll take a look at note 4, his conclusions. Objective nature does possess an objective source for value. Subjective behaviorism requires us to recognize axiogenetic tendencies. And religion synthesizes the two realities through faith and loyal to axiogenetic tendency. So from here we can move on to take a look at block 2. We'll take a look at the subjective consciousness and the work of logic. We begin with the event and consciousness. God is the unitary source for all processes in nature. And there's a fourfold aspect of event, which includes every event contains rational law, beauty, relation, and the interest of human consciousness. Consciousness always reaches beyond nature to event. That is, its tendency to reach beyond itself, and all space is recognized as conscious experience for Brightman. Nature is raised to event through conscious knowledge, which includes ideals, love, time, and logic. And that's important this is the subjective side that goes along with the objective axiogenetic tendencies. On the subjective side, we have conscious ideals, love, time, and logic. In Note 2, events are unified by logic. In this way, man becomes part of the axiogenetic process. This process is also axiosoteric, contributing to salvation. From the perspective of living religion, God saves us by transcendence and correction of error. So, axiogenetic tendencies become axiosoteric tendencies from the perspective of living religion. So we take a look at Note 3, objective event and subjective logic lead to positing God as person or God as subject. God becomes the rhema voice as the otherness of nature. Our apprehension and testing of this voice passes through the dialectic of experimental positing of coherence and interpretive construction. That is Brightman's definition of faith. Experimental positing of coherence and interpretive construction. That is faith for Brightman. Experience is always either physical, mental, or neutral. Defining God as person means that consciousness is not a product of materialistic organism. Nature includes an unseen conscious will, which is coherent, selective, and creative. God equals the total unified conscious personality of evolutionary theism, and all matter is the orderly expression of our experience of God. So, the ultimate creative energy in nature is the personal will of a God as subject within evolutionary theism. God as subject. That takes us on to Block 3. We're going to take a look at the evidence for a personal God. We've looked at objective axiogenetic tendencies. We've looked at subjective axiosoteric logic, seeking to achieve coherence. Now, under evidence for a personal God, noema ordering or noema sign model becomes consciousness of the real. Value experience is an actual entity. For Brightman, therefore, we possess an experience of value actuality, and anything posited as real becomes value hypothesis. If the value hypothesis can reach coherence with value actuality, then it's raised up to value reality for Brightman. That is a distinctly Hegelian definition. All hypothetical values are derived from value actuality. Therefore, value actuality contains all the evidence we need for constructing the otherness of the real. This happens because the axiogenetic forces in physical reality create the self's conscious experience, because they are the creative effects of God's will. So, axiogenetic force within and lying behind the physical reality is that which triggers our conscious axiosoteric experience. If you look at Note 2, we'll take a look at energia. We've looked at noema. Noema is the sign model ordering of IDAS ideals into a model. But now we look at energia as intelligible effect. From the perspective of living religion, we perceive the physical cosmos as the energia of rational mind. The adaptation of means to end is evidence of a personal God for Brightman. Teleosis facts reveal that purpose as actual does exist in reality. The evidence from the history and psychology of religion gives us monotheism, integration of personality, universal benevolence, and the concept of a personal God. All of this supports Brightman's claim that in Note 3, axiogenesis leads to axiosoteria. God is worshipped as the source of value, and IDAS ideals are not abstract entities, they are evidence for the personality of God because they are axiosoteric. Value, therefore, is always personal experience, and the cosmos reflects the ultimate person realizing ideals, the God of evolutionary theism, a God as subject within evolutionary theism. So Brightman tells us within the phenomenology of revelation, revelation is objective. It is the axiogenetic tendency present in nature. There are axiogenetic tendencies asking for participation of faith, which is experimental positing and interpretive construction. So we respond to these objective axiogenetic tendencies with subjective conscious behavior, which is logical. It's that logic of faith. Brightman posits a logic of faith. It is experimental positing and interpretive construction, the logic of faith. The objective and the subjective together create the evidence for a personal God, the evidence for God as subject. So it very precisely defines how Brightman can posit the notion of God as subject. It all centers around objective axiogenetic tendency and subjective axiosoteric consciousness. I'll say that again. It's objective axiogenetic tendency and subjective axiosoteric consciousness, which is experimental positing and interpretive construction. Faith for Brightman is logic of faith. Faith for Brightman is logic of faith. Logic of faith. Experimental positing and interpretive construction. Faith is always logic of faith. Faith is rational. Faith does not conflict with the rational. And those real entities, the objective and the subjective, create evidence for God as subject. And it gives us a powerful, powerful presentation here. This is our second lesson in the phenomenology of religion. We'll have one more lesson in the phenomenology of religion, but you can see how it fits into that comprehensive model we just looked at previously. You can see how this revelatory moment takes up the logic of faith. And that's critical for Brightman. He says that the objective axiogenetic tendencies create and trigger the logic of faith. They trigger that logic of faith. They grasp the self and trigger the response of the logic of faith, which involves our participation in forming the noema design of ultimate value as a sign model, and then positing that through the logic of faith to reach coherence and verification. And that's going to wrap up pages 202 to 232, and I'll give you the recall triad one more time. Objective axiogenetic tendency plus subjective axiosoteric consciousness bring about evidence for God as subject within evolutionary theism. And we will pick up next time with page 233.